Welcome to this virtual town hall with NSF Hydrologic Sciences. My name is Julia. I'm the Science Education and Outreach Coordinator at Quasi. Thank you for joining for today's webinar. While people are logging on and getting settled, I just wanted to go through a couple upcoming events at Quasi before we get started with this virtual town hall. So tomorrow, we have actually another virtual forum about transitioning to the online classroom. A number of professors in hydrologic sciences who have experience teaching online courses have come together to provide a bunch of resources for instructors that are making this transition. And there's going to be a forum for so that instructors have the opportunity to ask questions tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time, same time. The link to that webinar can be found on the Quasi website, right on the homepage. You'll find it there. There's also a list of Quasi resources that might be useful for professors transitioning to online instruction. Additionally, Quasi has a postdoctoral position opening up in flood resistance research. The deadline to apply for that is March 31st. The Quasi Instrumentation Discovery Travel Grant is now accepting applications as well. The application deadline for that is April 5th. And finally, save the date for the Quasi Biennial Colloquium in July. Quasi is moving forward with all currently scheduled activities at this time, so stay tuned for all of those. We also have either registration or applications open for at least 3 workshops that will be happening this summer in July and August. Applications for the Precipitation Estimation and Analysis of Remotely Sensed Information workshop at UC Irvine. Applications close March 25th for that, and that workshop will be in July. And then we have 2 other workshops that are being held at Pacific Northwest National Labs in August. The first one being the Reactive Transport with Sophisticated Reaction Networks workshop. The registration deadline for that is at the end of April. And our last workshop, using E4D to remotely image the subsurface, will also be at Pacific Northwest National Lab. The registration deadline for that one is May 13th. I would encourage you to keep those in mind and to sign up for our newsletter at quasi.org or to contact me, and I can make sure that you're added to the list to keep up with all of the upcoming Quasi events. And it looks like we have a lot of attendees already logged in. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Laura Lautz, who will be our first presenter for today.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Laura Lautz. I'm a program director for the Hydrologic Sciences Program at the National Science Foundation. And I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for attending. I know that these are unusual times and likely your schedules and commitments are chaotic at this time. And I'm just really grateful that you're able to set aside a little bit of time to learn about the Hydrologic Sciences Program at NSF. And I hope everyone is staying healthy, staying well, and making it through this difficult time. So we're going to use the next hour to talk a bit about the Hydrologic Sciences Program at NSF. We have a bunch of information that we've put together to share with you all. And then we want to make sure there's plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So I hope as we go through the presentation, you will feel free to put forward any questions you might have about the Hydrologic Sciences Program, about the National Science Foundation, about ways to engage with program directors. So we can use that opportunity to answer your questions. Okay, so I am hosting this town hall with my colleagues, my fellow program officers in hydrologic sciences. And so you'll hear from both Ingrid and Justin later on in the town hall, but let me just provide a brief introduction. So Ingrid Padilla is a rotator at the National Science Foundation. She's a program officer in hydrologic sciences, and she is rotating at NSF on leave from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. And also Justin Lawrence is a program officer in hydrologic sciences. He is a permanent program officer at the National Science Foundation and also a program officer for the Geomorphology and Land Use Dynamics program. So as you ask questions today, the three of us will kind of put our heads together and try to answer them for you. So we wanted to kind of go through a bunch of different topics. And one that we get asked a lot that I wanted to touch on is when and why you should contact or communicate with someone like Justin, Ingrid, or I, program officer. And my suggestion would be to ask us questions early and often, and really feel free to be in direct communication with your program officer. We get asked questions all the time, things like, is my proposal idea a good fit for the Hydrologic Sciences program? Maybe folks need clarification on a requirement of our program, limitations, what one can or can't do within the scope of a proposal to hydrologic sciences. If the proposal idea is not necessarily the right fit or doesn't fit within the limits of our program, we can also help you figure out the other programs at NSF that might be appropriate for your research. We also get contacted a lot by folks who are interested in serving as ad hoc reviewers or panelists or even rotators at the National Science Foundation. And we, of course, are always looking for ad hoc reviewers and panelists. And so you should definitely feel free to reach out to program officers just to let them know, hey, I'm here and I'd love to participate in any of those roles. So the first question on the prior slide was essentially about the scope of the program, Hydrologic Sciences at NSF. And you can find a lot of this information in the solicitation, but we'll give you kind of the broad overview here. So essentially, the Hydrologic Sciences program at the National Science Foundation looks at the terrestrial hydrologic cycle. So any research related to the fluxes of water in the terrestrial environment that constitute the water cycle, how fluxes of water contribute to the transport of mass and energy, how fluxes of water in the terrestrial water cycle carry solutes, sediments, so components carried by water across boundaries between different components of that terrestrial system. We're very interested in how water interacts with the landscape and the ecosystem, and those are areas that intersect with other programs at the National Science Foundation, and how the hydrologic cycle is altered by land use change, climate change, and other human impacts. So very broadly, we look at any kind of physical, chemical, and biological processes that are coupled to water transport. So this means that there are some foundational topics in hydrologic sciences that we have supported in the past, currently support, and will continue to support, kind of the core foundational topics in our discipline. And this can give you an idea of just the general topics that are always central to our program. So we look at research that addresses questions about rainfall, runoff, infiltration and stream flow, land-atmosphere interactions in the form of evaporation, transpiration, how water moves through soils and aquifers, how suspended, dissolved, and colloidal components are transported through the hydrologic system, and those physical, chemical, and biological processes that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes folks are wondering if proposals to hydrologic sciences have to have an observational component or have to have a modeling component, or whether they can be purely experimental or pure modeling. And the truth is we support projects that use all of those different methods and not all of them at the same time. So you can put together proposals that use observational, experimental, theoretical, modeling, and or field approaches. And we're interested in all of those things. Projects in our discipline, hydrologic sciences is of course in the division of earth sciences at NSF, but we are a relatively interdisciplinary program, and the projects that we support commonly involve expertise from, yes, the earth sciences, but also ecosystem science, engineering, and math. We have some areas that are emerging, and we put some slides in here to describe that, to essentially inspire you to think about what are some emerging topics in hydrologic sciences that you might tackle that would be appropriate for our program. But this isn't meant to be limiting or to somehow suggest that we are only looking for proposals in these topics. So one area of emerging interest across the National Science Foundation is the intersection of the physical sciences and data science. So for example, data fusion, how do we integrate large data sets, whether they're large in spatial scale, large in length scale, temporal scale, or resolution? How do we integrate those data sets into hydrologic models? How can we use machine learning approaches? Harnessing the data revolution is a big idea at the National Science Foundation. And so we're interested in how we can incorporate machine learning methods into hydrologic models or into interpretation of hydrologic observations. And how can we use data mining? Like, how can we extract information from image processing? So there's a lot of research kind of exploding in the field of unmanned aerial systems. How can we use those images and those large data sets to extract information that would inform hydrological processes? And similarly, signal processing, extracting a signal from noise, time series analysis. This is just an area that is really growing right now, and we're interested in how we can apply the advances in data science to the hydrologic sciences. We're also always interested in translation of hydrologic science findings across scales. So hydrologic sciences addresses problems at the pore scale to the continental or global scale. So for example, we're interested in how we can leverage advances in remote sensing and hydrologic modeling to really understand systems at much larger scales than we have ever been able to do. And at the same time as we scale up, how do we incorporate micro scale processes into those macro scale simulations and vice versa? I think this is a real kind of grand challenge in our discipline, in many disciplines, and something we're definitely interested in supporting. I mentioned that the hydrologic sciences is an interdisciplinary field. And so there are some areas we've seen kind of emerging interest. So for example, eco-hydrology, the interaction between vegetation and hydrologic processes, and just the broad ways humans have impacted waterscapes through urbanization, agriculture, land use change, and global change. We're also really interested in developing stronger collaborations with other federal agencies. So recently, there have been workshops and there are pending reports on really leveraging the strength in hydroterrestrial modeling across a number of different agencies, from the USGS to NOAA to the Department of Energy and NASA. How can we work with these agencies to advance our national capabilities in hydroterrestrial modeling? Relevant to that is the effectiveness of data sharing and integration across these different agencies within our field. And there are applications that are emerging between hydrologic sciences and public health, so working with NIH. So I mentioned those to give you a sense of the scope of the Hydrologic Sciences Program, which is quite broad, and hopefully you can see how your research might fit into the broad umbrella that I've just presented. But I really want to emphasize that those areas of interest are not meant to be limiting. They're really meant to be a source of brainstorming and idea generation. And so we put this slide in here thinking, if you have an idea of an emerging research area that's of national importance, that is a hydrologic science question, we want to hear your ideas. And our commitment is to supporting the most meritorious research in any area relevant to hydrologic sciences, whether it's interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, or even within just a single discipline. And we're really interested in emerging fields and those that are responsive to the needs of our community. So that's a little bit about our program and what types of projects we support. We also get a lot of questions about the various different types of awards that individuals can apply for at the National Science Foundation, and particularly in our program. And so I want to walk through a few of those, and we'd be happy to answer follow-on questions if you would like us to get into more detail. So of course, we accept regular research proposals, either from single institutions or collaborative proposals. So collaborative proposals are when multiple institutions submit a proposal where they have the same project description, but they submit separate proposals with unique budgets, unique lists of PIs, so that the awards are made to the separate institutions, but they're for a collaborative project. Those regular research proposals can address acquisition of new data. They can also be synthesis projects. So we are happy to review and consider proposals that make use of existing data, especially with our emerging interest in data science and how we can leverage the wealth of data out there and improve data integration. These projects are typically 2 to 4 years in duration and have budgets that span a range from $250,000 to $700,000. Those are just general guidelines and, again, not hard limits, but they give you a sense of the scope and size of award that we typically make. With our annual budget, that means we can make about 25 to 35 awards of that size every year. In addition to those regular research proposals, we have career awards, and career awards are due in the summer months. They have a deadline. We'll get to deadlines in a minute. And those are a unique category of award because they're for early career investigators. They're for faculty members who are pre-tenure. They're 5 years, they're $500,000 or greater. And we, as a program, make only a small number of awards per year in this category. So 3 or 4 awards per year for career grants in the hydrologic sciences. We get lots of questions about rapid awards. Rapid awards are much smaller and exactly what they sound like, awards that can be made rapidly. They fall outside of the standard review process so that we can make awards very quickly. And they're done most often in response to extreme events or natural disasters where there's an opportunity to collect a data set that would be lost if we were not able to respond rapidly. So for example, if there were a hurricane and an opportunity to collect data that would not otherwise, we wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do for such an unpredictable event that would inform hydrological processes. The motivation is still research. We want to know how is this data set going to provide a unique opportunity to advance research in our field. But the award itself is for the cost of collecting that perishable data. So they're usually $50,000 or less, but we can award them quite rapidly. There's also a category of award called the RCN. So individuals can, or I should say groups in this case, can submit proposals to the Hydrologic Sciences Program that are for research coordination networks. Research coordination networks are awards that are designed to foster new collaborations between groups of investigators that address interdisciplinary topics. So to give an example of this, let's say there was an emerging tool being applied across pretty disparate research topics, and the research being done by different groups was not well coordinated, and there wasn't really kind of a network surrounding this particular tool. One could propose an RCN to bring together people who haven't worked together before and really do things like figure out what are the really unanswered questions, how to better communicate and coordinate the research that they're doing across these different disciplinary or organizational boundaries, and maybe even develop some new community standards around data or metadata in that area. They're not actually for the research questions itself, but for developing these new collaborative networks. We also support postdoctoral fellowships. So the Division of Earth Sciences has a postdoctoral fellowship program. The postdoctoral fellowship program makes fellowship awards that are 2 years in duration. They're standard. They include a $62,000 stipend for the postdoc, plus a $25,000 per year budget for research-related activities. The postdoctoral fellowship program has its own solicitation, and those proposals are submitted through that solicitation. But we as a program participate in the review process and typically co-fund postdoctoral fellowship awards. We support workshops and conference travel. You would want to inquire first. So you could reach out to a program officer and say, hey, I'm thinking of organizing a workshop around a particular topic, maybe in an emerging field. And you want to seek support to make sure you can attract a diverse audience, provide mentorship activities, really get broad community participation. We would consider those workshop requests. Those are less than $100,000, typically much less, maybe less than $50,000 even. And again, those would be things where you'd inquire with your program officer first. And if we think in concept you have a good idea that we're interested in supporting, then you would go ahead and submit a full proposal through the NSF submission process. I also wanted to make people aware of the Powell Center. This is through the USGS, and the Powell Center supports partnerships between the US Geological Survey and academics. And the idea is to create new interdisciplinary working groups that are analyzing existing data. And the awards typically fund a postdoc for a couple years and travel for that collaborative interdisciplinary working group to convene a couple times a year around the synthesis topic. And then you have a postdoc to really support implementation of that work. So the things that I mentioned, many of them are described in the solicitation. So if you're new to NSF, any program, most programs have they either have a program description or a program solicitation. In our case, we have an actual solicitation. You can go right online and there's a PDF and there's lots of great information about what we're looking for in our program. And I would say any program that you're applying to at NSF, it can really yield big rewards to read the solicitation and make sure that you're responding to the solicitation and following the directions laid out in the solicitation when preparing a proposal. Our solicitation gives a synopsis of our program and the type of projects that we fund, which you heard about earlier in the presentation. It'll always have contact information for current program officers. So we have rotators. So I mentioned Ingrid Padilla is a rotator at the National Science Foundation. And so by virtue of having rotators, program officers do change through time. And so you can always see who the current program officers are by looking at the solicitation. It'll tell you what the typical award sizes are and durations, any program specific requirements, et cetera. And this would be true for any solicitation, even those outside of hydrologic sciences. One thing I'll say about our solicitation is we accept proposals at any time. So many of you may be aware of this, but the Division of Earth Sciences recently, for the most part, eliminated deadlines. And so our program does not have a deadline and we will accept proposals anytime. More on that later. Oh, actually right now. So one outcome of eliminating deadlines is it turns out that many of us, including myself, are deadline driven. And because programs have eliminated deadlines, we have seen a change in the total number of proposals submitted to our program. And that's a good news for our community in that the workload for ad hoc reviewers and panelists is a little bit more manageable. And also success rates have improved. So this is a good time, I think, to be submitting a proposal to hydrologic sciences. So I haven't put numbers on here. We don't share the absolute values of these numbers, but you can certainly see the temporal change and that we have seen a decline in proposal submissions in response to the elimination of the deadline. That's, of course, not the case for our career proposals. The career program still has a deadline, and we still see consistent and high rates of proposal submissions to the career grant program. And we continue to make a similar number of awards each year, as I talked about earlier. So a little bit about the process. You know, what happens when you go ahead and decide to submit a proposal to the National Science Foundation and to the Hydrologic Sciences Program. When you submit your proposal, which you can do anytime, you could do it tomorrow, you could do it later today, you could do it 6 months from now. It initially goes through a basic compliance check. And so we make sure that the proposal is compliant and we don't need to return it because something's missing or it doesn't meet the requirements of the program. The good news is with no deadline, if you submit a proposal that's not compliant, we can return it to you. You can fix any problems and resubmit the proposal, and you don't have to wait until the following deadline. So that's one also advantage of having elimination of deadlines. In our program, different programs review proposals in slightly different ways. In the Division of Earth Sciences and in Hydrologic Sciences, once we decide the proposal is compliant and it's appropriate for our program, we will start to solicit ad hoc reviewers. We get a minimum of 3 ad hoc reviews. Sometimes we get a lot more. Sometimes we'll have 8 or 9 ad hoc reviews. And some of that will depend on how many ad hoc reviewers are needed to address different elements of a proposal. So for example, if it's interdisciplinary and across multiple programs, we might solicit more ad hoc reviewers that can review different elements of the proposal that might be relevant for different programs or different communities. Once we've solicited those ad hoc reviews, we convene a panel. We have a panel typically twice a year. We convene the panel and they review anywhere from 40 to 60 proposals, and they take into consideration the feedback from the ad hoc reviewers. They also have their own internal discussion and review, and they will write a panel summary and make a recommendation to the program about how competitive the proposal is. Is it highly competitive? Is it competitive? Is it not competitive? And then we as program officers take all that information, the ad hoc reviews, the panel summary and recommendations, and then our own assessment of what is needed to maintain balance in our program, making sure we're funding different sub-disciplines within hydrologic sciences, investigators at different career stages, investigators from different types of institutions, looking at the most meritorious proposals across all those different areas within our program, and then we select those for whom we'd like to make an award. And so then once we have decided, yes, this is a proposal that we want to award, we are in a position to make a recommendation to the National Science Foundation. So we put together our argument and we send that award recommendation to our division director, who reviews it and concurs or approves of our recommendation or asks for additional information. And once the division director is approved, it goes on to the Division of Grants and Agreements, who do the actual award of money, funds to the institution. Our goal is to process all awards, and that means within 6 months. And by process awards, I mean when you submit a proposal, our goal is to get to the division director decision stage within 6 months. And that's a challenge sometimes with no deadline, but that is our goal. And so if you're wondering, when am I going to hear back on my award? Typically, we try to respond so that you would know our recommendation within 6 months. Okay, so writing a proposal. So there's lots of advice we could give you about writing a proposal, but just to kind of get you thinking about how you might approach this challenge of writing a grant to the National Science Foundation, pick a question that excites you, one that's not too site specific, one that you think will excite your community. Think about that question from its broadest perspective, thinking beyond your research domain and really how the folks from across the hydrologic sciences would view the importance and excitement surrounding that question. Think about how you might overcome challenges in the research that you're proposing, how you could effectively do great science and really make a difference. And give your ideas time to develop. You want to make sure you're not rushing. It takes a long time to put together a competitive proposal. One important thing that you can do to make sure your proposal is most competitive is really clearly articulate both for the ad hoc reviewers, the panelists, and for the program officers, what is the gap in knowledge that you aim to address? Is there new knowledge or theory that's needed to answer the question that you're posing? Have you presented specific testable hypotheses that bridge a gap in knowledge? What data do you need to test those hypotheses that you've laid out? So really clearly relating the question that you're asking to what are the motivating hypotheses and how data or work that you propose, to collect, or the work that you propose to do is really going to turn around and address those questions and hypotheses that you've laid out. Is what you've proposed to do reasonable within the time frame and budget of the project and within the time frame and budget of awards that we're able to fund? If it's not, you might bite off a smaller part of the problem, refine your hypotheses so you can get to a project that falls within the scope of what we are able to fund in our program. So powerful proposal is one that has a strong foundation. So we have the three-legged stool here as an analogy, where one, the proposal has a strong underlying theoretical framework and testable hypotheses that are clearly articulated in the proposal. The proposal suggests the acquisition or synthesis of data. So you don't always have to be acquiring primary data. You could also be synthesizing existing data, but you are generating new knowledge. And then clearly showing how that data acquisition or synthesis will be used to test the hypotheses you've laid out and fill the knowledge gap that you've identified. So this is just a list of questions as you put together a proposal to make sure you've addressed. Why should people care? What's the societal relevance? You know, what makes your proposed research project so compelling and something that we simply must do? Have you demonstrated what work has been done and how you build on that, and why what you're doing is different than what's been done in the past? Have you showed that the work that you're proposing falls within your expertise and your career trajectory and plans? You know, are you the right person to do the work that you've proposed? Do you have a project management strategy that includes benchmarks, timelines, and metrics? You know, do you have a plan for phased work that will ultimately lead to the endpoint that you've identified you want to get to? And is that clear to the reviewers that you're the right person with the right plan to do this work that absolutely must be done? Has everyone on the team committed to follow through on what they agreed to do? Are they the right team? Have you identified the right collaborators? Will you have the resources you need to accomplish all the aspects of your project? Is it realistic? And what would success look like? And how would you know if you were successful? If you can answer these questions in your proposal, you're off to a great start. So the next phase of the talk will be a few of the key proposal elements. There isn't time to go through all of them, but we want to touch on some of the most important components of a proposal to NSF. We would encourage you to review what we call the PAPG, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. Any question that you have is answered in here. It's really just the challenge of finding it in what is admittedly quite a long and complicated document, but it does answer any question you might have about the rules and regulations and policies. So you have some things that are automatically generated by NSF, the cover sheet and other things, but the parts that are critical for you to put together are the project summary and description. We've talked a little bit about some key elements there. A bio sketch, a budget and budget justification, a postdoctoral mentoring plan if you're proposing a postdoc. And so we're going to walk through some of the most critical components on this list. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Ingrid Padilla, who I introduced earlier, to talk a bit about NSF merit review criteria and some of those components of the NSF proposal.
Hi, thanks again for being here. I am Ingrid Padilla, and as Laura mentioned, I am a rotator, program director rotator at the NSF. I will be touching on some of the components that are taken into account when reviewing a proposal. I will also mention some other related programs that you may submit proposals to. Before I start talking about these components, I would like to remind the participants or let know new participants that tomorrow Kwasi will be hosting a forum on transitioning to the online classroom. That will be tomorrow at from 2 to 3 p.m. And this is very pertinent with what is happening right now with all the classes going online and so on. I also want to emphasize or encourage you to look at the PAPG that Laura just mentioned. That will have a lot of the answers and a lot of the guides on what you have to follow when you're writing your proposal. So when we receive a proposal, Laura indicated we have a hybrid review process. So we will initially request ad hoc reviewers, and then we will take the proposals to panel. And both the ad hoc reviewers and the panelist or the panel will be reviewing on these two criteria, which they are the NSF Merit review criteria. The intellectual merit addresses the potential to advance knowledge and understanding in the hydrologic sciences. Will particularly focus on advancing knowledge and understanding in hydrologic processes or water balances, the components of hydrologic systems. Broader impacts address the potential of the proposal or the proposed activities to benefit society. Next. I also, so it is extremely important that you address both intellectual merit and broader impact explicitly in the project summary as well as in the project description. I would like to mention that among the most commonly asked questions that we received in our program is, does my idea fit the program? Is this a good topic for the hydrologic program? And we like you to think about, as Laura indicated before, what is the hypothesis-driven research question, or what are the hypothesis-driven research questions that you're posing? And if they fit within hydrologic processes or hydrologic sciences, they fit the program. I will just use a very simple example. If you work with ecosystems, right? Water, it's everywhere. So we tend to think, well, if it's water in there, then it should fit the hydrologic sciences program, but it really has to advance the knowledge and understanding in hydrologic processes. So in the example of ecosystems, let's say that you work with ecosystems and you want to look at how different changes in ecosystems affect the water balance or affect hydrologic processes. That is a great question for the hydrologic sciences program. However, if you want to address how water impacts a particular ecosystem, that will not be appropriate for hydrologic systems. So you have to think about what is the research question and what is that hypothesis-driven question that you're trying to answer. Next. I think there's one missing. Can you go back? Oh, no, this is it. And this is correct. Thank you, Laura. So when we do the review, there are 5 review elements that we ask our reviewers and panelists to take into account for both the intellectual merit and the broader impact. So first, they have to address what is the potential of the proposal to advance the knowledge and understanding of the hydrologic within the hydrologic sciences or processes, and that is the intellectual merit that I just talked about. And also, we ask what is the potential for the proposed activities and the outcomes to benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes, and those are the broader impacts. We also ask reviewers and the panel to address whether what is being proposed, the activities or the outcomes, are creative, original, and transformative, as opposed to just incrementally advance knowledge. We have to balance between I'm comfortable in what I'm doing and I just want to step it up a little bit, or do I propose something that it's maybe risky, but it could be very transformative in what we think in our community. We also ask reviewers and the panel to address how well the proposal and the activities are organized and reasoned. Do they have, have a good background and rationale, they're supporting their hypotheses with previous work or literature work that it's there. Does the proposal address how they're going to address success? So mostly intellectual merits, a scientific part of the component, it is commonly thought that publications are going to are a measure, a metrics of success of the research that we're doing, and that is true in a way. But there are other ways of measuring success, and particularly this is true for broader impacts. Many times, the broader impacts are left for the last page or the last 2 pages of the proposal, and I advise you that you really think about this, and I will talk about this in the next slide. But it is not just okay to say, I'm going to do something and not have a way of measuring that something that you're doing. So if you are proposing to outreach underrepresented students, you want to make sure that you have a way of how you're going to do it, and you explain it in a proposal, and how you measure how successful you were at the end of your proposal or the period that you're proposing. We also ask reviewers and the panel to assess how well qualified the PIs and the co-PIs are, and how well qualified the institution is. And this is not to say that only research one institutions are the ones that are going to do research, but we do want to make sure that the institutions have the capacity to do the research that is being proposed. So if you are proposing to do a geologic study and your university doesn't have a geologic program, it may not be well equipped in terms of the students and the resources that you need to do that. And of course, you want to also address those resources that are available in the institution. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the broader impacts. I was kind of getting ahead of myself. Broader impacts, which is a review criteria that we take very seriously. There are a broad range of activities that can be proposed. And among these are just examples. You could propose to advance discovery and understanding while promoting teaching, training, and learning. For example, you're gonna teach your students or undergraduate students or K through 12 students about the research and the outcomes of your research. Or you may be targeting teachers to continue on that teaching. You may want to broaden participation by reaching out to underrepresented groups. Historically Black college and universities or other minority serving institutions, and outreach to underrepresented groups, community college veterans. You may want to build partnership with other federal agencies, industry, not-for-profit organizations that are related to the hydrologic sciences or what we want to advance. You may want to make sure that you enhance the infrastructure at the institution or at the community that you're working with for research and education, and that is improving data or software, equipment, even human resources. You may want to include to broadly disseminate the information to communities. And you could do this not just by going to conferences and talking about your research, but also by involving citizen scientists, by involving museums, and by creating games, like virtual games that our kids are going to be using and learning at the same time on hydrologic sciences. And you may also want to include how you're going to benefit society by integrating policymakers, stakeholders, decision makers into your research. So broader impacts should be integrated within your research. So you should not be proposing do something different between your research and the broader impacts that you are proposing. And they should definitely address those 5 elements that I talked about before. How well equipped the team is, are they transformative, or is it the same? For instance, it is commonly used that we're gonna train graduate students. Well, this is something that it's done commonly in every research, so that is not very innovative. That is not very transformative. You really want to take advantage of using the broader impacts to inform others about what you're doing. I'm a hydrologist, so when I talk to people that, or my 5-year-old nephew or my friends, and I say I'm a hydrologist, and like, well, what hydrologists do? Well, it makes me realize that people, even though all depend on water and are impacted by hydrologic processes, they don't see this as something that we need to study and learn. And it is very important. Decisions are made based on the knowledge that people and communities have. So you really have to take this information out there. It is to your benefit. It is to your research benefit to broaden that participation in every sense. So if you're developing a model and there are stakeholders, decision makers that may be able to use this model, this is a great tool. You want to reach out and talk to those people and ask them, hey, can you use this? Can we work together? You want to develop it in a way that could be used ultimately a benefit to society. Next slide, please. If you have any other questions on broader impacts, please ask. As Laura said, always ask, and you could contact us anytime. When you're developing your budget for Hydrologic Sciences Program, generally the budget ranges, and this is just a range, between $250,000 and $700,000 for 2 to 4 year period. This is just a range. It could be more than that. Less, you have to make sure that you are realistic and reasonable in what you're proposing. And this is less or more. And in any budget that you have, you want to make sure that what you are putting in your budget is something that goes along with what you're proposing, your activities, and the outcomes that you're going to do. So your budget needs to be well justified with what you're doing. And it should reflect the cost of what you're really doing. You should not, and this is either underestimating or overestimating. If you say that you're going to use LiDAR and you don't have a LiDAR equipment and you're going to have to rent it, and you don't show that in your budget, then reviewers are going to question, well, how are you going to do it if there's no budget for that? The same thing, if you're going to go out there and you're going to try to bring teachers and you don't have any cost or any budget for those activities, they're going to question how you're going to do it. What are eligible costs that you could include? You could include personal salary for the PIs, postdoc, graduate students, undergraduate students. There was an earlier question on the limits of 2 months for the PIs, and that is generally the case. There are exceptions, and it is always good to ask your program director for that. So if you do have cases that this needs to be different, just make sure that we reach out to the program director. You could put money for equipment, material, supplies, travel. You could put money for sub-awards. It could be other institutions, or it could be contracted somebody. If you're doing an assessment of a new education in your broader impact and you need somebody to assess it and you contract it, you could put it there. You could include money for computational data management, which is something that we don't see often, and participant cost. Just make sure that you read in the PABG what participant cost allows. If you're doing a conference and you have a speaker, for instance, that would not be a participant costs allowed. That would be just within the budget itself. A participant would be somebody who's participating of the conference but not given the talk themselves. And of course, indirect cost. Next. So if you are including a postdoc associate in your proposal, you have to have a postdoctoral mentoring plan. And all of the collaborative proposals, the lead proposal is the one who is going to present this postdoctoral mentoring plan. Next. So the reason why we want to have a postdoctoral mentoring plan, it's because we want to have a mechanism that we could assure that this training, being a postdoc, it's a training, and that this is going to be successful. It's not just about doing work for a research or a PI, but it's what do the postdoc doctoral associates gain from it. So we want to have a plan on that, and we want to assess it when we finish that, when the postdoc finished that position. So we want to provide counseling, and it could include going into academia, going to industry, going to a government. We want to the postdocs to build a network, just like the ones that we have. So we want to make them part of our family. We would like to see that there's how they're gonna get training and in different topics, technical aspects, ethical aspects, broader impact aspects. We would like to see how the postdoc, it's going to collaborate, and it's going to work on publications, and how you're going to train them on how to best publish and how to best present, how they're going to develop their professional and teaching skills, and basically provide the coaching that it will make this postdoc successful as they move on with their career. Next. Data management plan, every proposal requires it, as Laura mentioned, and it could be up to 2 pages. Please use them. If you, they don't have to be long, but they should be substantial. We are becoming more strict in looking at the data management plan, or at least we're asking our reviewers and panelists to become more strict. As was mentioned before, the Division of Earth Sciences has a policy that data that could be, data that it's collected, or model outputs, or data synthesis, have to be publicly available within 2 years of collection. And that has to be integrated into the data management plan. Our own policy is that the data needs to be deposited in data centers where people could actually access the data, because otherwise they're not going to be able to access it. And we don't say where, but we often advise that we go to places, that the PIs go to places and deposited their data in well-known places such as Quasi Data Services, EarthCame, Data One, GitHub, ArcGIS Hub. Their common weaknesses, PIs really need to take the data management plan into very seriously, because we're requiring this strictly. So there are common weaknesses that we see, and it's that the PI says, well, the PI, it's going to provide the data when somebody asks. Well, this is not acceptable. The data needs to be available 2 years after collection, and it should be in places that people could find it. Right? It has to be findable. Sometimes they say, well, the data is going to be made available after publication. That is not acceptable unless you publish before 2 years, because it has to be made available 2 years after the collection. And storing it in Excel or a private computer server, it's not acceptable either. It needs to be deposited in places where people could find it. Next, please. We ask our reviewers to look at some specific within the data management plan, does the data management plan, DMP, identify key data sets and research product? I mean, what is it that they're going to produce? Do they describe the data sets? Do they say what type of data? Is it going to be water quality? Is it going to be hydraulic heads? Is it going to be flow? Is it what is the data that it's going to be generated and the formats? Do they describe the metadata and the data? Do they have policies to for access and sharing the data? Do they have policies for reuse of the data? Do they have a plan to how they're going to preserve the data? Sorry, that is my dog. We're not at the NSF, and I can't control that. So I apologize. So we also ask reviewers to look at if the selection of the repositories and the timeline is in compliance with the policies that we have, the ones that I mentioned before. And we also like to see that there is budget and resources allocated for the data management plans, because we cannot work in a vacuum. We cannot have a good data management and good data access if we don't have resources. Next. So I mentioned Quasi as a data depository, and and it's a good transition to talk about some of the facilities that that you should take advantage of when you're thinking about your proposals, depending on the research that you're doing. So Quasi, of course, serves as an infrastructure to access and disseminate data through, for example, HydroShare, and you could deposit some of your data there. And it promotes a lot of interdisciplinary collaborations. So, it's always good to take advantage of the resources that are provided through Quasi, and, become a member. And this is not a paid advertisement, but there are a lot of resources that you could use. The Center for Transformative Environmental Monitoring, or CTEMS, it's also supported by the NSF, and it provides fiber optic temperature measurement systems, as well as multi-parameter sensor stations and unmanned aircraft systems for your research. This is based on a user's fee. You could contact them if you need any of this, and talk to them about the costs as well as the schedule of using any of these systems. The National Center for Airborne Laser Mapping provides research quality airborne light detection and ranging observations, that is LiDAR, as well. Just like CTEMS, this is for users fee, so you should contact them and check on if you need to use their services. Next. Letters of a collaboration, if you are collaborating and you're indicating in your proposal that you actually have collaboration with people or organizations, get out of here. The letter, these are not letters of recommendations or support. These are letter of collaboration, and they should include the statement that it's indicated in here. And if the proposal submitted by this person entitled this title is selected for funding, I intend to collaborate and commit resources. You don't have, actually, we ask that you don't put anything on what are the resources. You're gonna use exactly this statement. There are some programs in which special type of letters are requested. For instance, for careers, there is a longer letter of collaboration or of support that is requested from the department head, and there are other solicitations that also require that different types of letters of support. For international collaboration, the letters of support could be more substantial than just this statement, but always ask your program director, program officer, whether it is accepted to use it. There was a question, now that I'm mentioning the international collaboration, there was a question in our chat about whether international collaborations could be co-PIs in collaborative proposals, and you could have international collaboration. However, they could not be funded by NSF sources. So they're generally not going to have a different proposal because there's not going to be funding for them. But you can have international collaboration. Next. So Laura touched on this. When will you know the outcome of your proposal? And we aim at having recommendation within 6 months of when you submit. However, there are circumstances that sometimes prevent us from there. Last year, we had the federal shutdown, and that disrupted our system. This year, as you all know, we're going through a very difficult situation, and we're adjusting as we move. So there may be some delays, bear with us if they are, but there are sometimes circumstances that that may delay that. We, as Laura mentioned, we have at least 2 panels per year. And as she also mentioned, we will take our proposals. First, we request the ad hoc reviews. Once we have those ad hoc reviews, then we take it to panel. So we have to have those reviews before we take it to panel, and that takes some time. Next, please. So co-reviews and co-funding. We recognize that a lot of the very great research, it's done not just within one field, but it is multidisciplinary, or it has other components that are not just hydrologic sciences. And as Laura mentioned before, our research commonly involves other areas of basic sciences and engineering, math, and biological sciences, chemistry. So when we get proposals that have elements of other programs, so let's say that you're doing something that has to do with transport of ions in water, and there are research questions regarding the hydrologic component, but there are also research questions that have to do with the interaction between the water and the rock, which would have elements of geochemistry. Then we reach out to program officers in those programs, and we say, hey, do you have any interest in co-reviewing? Does this fit your program? That doesn't mean that we're asking them to take the proposal. We're asking them to look at elements that commonly we don't take into account. And we do quite a bit of co-reviews and co-funding. Co-funding means that they put money into it because they're interested in the topic, with geomorphology and land use dynamics, with physical and dynamic meteorology. I hope my dog is not making a big deal. No, okay. With ecosystem studies, that is in the biology directorate. As I mentioned, geology and low temperature geochemistry. With the human environments and geographical sciences, with the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. This is a new program right now that comes out of the Critical Zone Observatory. So we don't have yet any co-review, co-funding, but it's because it's a new program. With sedimentary geology and paleobiology. Next, please. So these are typical that we do co-reviews and co-funding. There are other programs that also integrate hydrologic sciences within the NSF, and you should look at these programs when you have ideas that involve hydrology, not just hydrologic sciences it's going to fund your hydrologic work. There are other programs that are related that you could submit your proposal to. And some are the CNH2, Dynamics of Integrated Socio-Environmental Systems, the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. That was, it's a new program right now. The Frontiers Research in Earth Sciences, Signal in the Soil, and this involves several agencies, including USDA. And Coastline and People, this is a dear colleague letter, but I believe there is a solicitation that will be coming soon. Next. Other programs, the Earth Cube, which supports cyber infrastructure. And there was a question actually at the beginning on the difference between data fusion awards in hydrologic sciences and Earth Cube. And the difference is, what are the research questions and hypothesis-driven questions that you have, right? So if it's about building a cyber infrastructure, that would not be good fit for hydrologic sciences. If it is about research questions on hydrologic sciences that have cyber infrastructure components, then these are areas that we could either co-review, co-fund, or it may be better to submit to the Earth Cube system. And that is the same thing with geoinformatics, which is a different program. There's also a question that I want to address on data fusion in other areas other than hydrologic modeling. Yes, data fusion. Well, generally when you do data fusion, you're doing some type of modeling. It could be statistical, it could be, I mean, it could be different, but data fusion does not have to be just hydrologic modeling. It could involve other type of hydrologic data. Again, you want to make sure that your research questions are within the hydrologic sciences and hydrologic processes. There are also programs in education and training, like the research experiences for undergraduate, the research experiences for teachers, which the National Science Foundation Research Traineeship, which is for graduate students, and GeoPath, which it's to improve STEM education for undergraduate in geologic sciences. Next. And as Laura mentioned before, and if we repeated some things, it's by design, because some things are so important that we really wanted to repeat them. So it's not that we didn't think about them. So if we repeated it, make sure that you pay attention. But ways to get involved, yeah, we are always looking for ad hoc reviewers and panelists, and so this is a great way. It's a great experience for you as researchers and PIs or students. Well, students, postdocs generally are involved in ad hoc reviewers. Students are not, or as panelists. Serve as a panelist, as I mentioned before, either for hydrologic sciences, the postdoctoral fellowship program, our youth proposal, or any other programs, but our program principally, because then you get to know the community, and this is very important in getting the community together. And always contact us or come and visit the NSF and meet us. I mean, and when you go to meetings, when you go to AGU or GSA, come and talk to us. We love to talk to you. And I know now we're not really having visits to the NSF because of the situation, but and other times, please come and visit us. Next. Finally, we would like to make you aware that we have put together 2 sessions at the Geologic Society of America conference coming up in Montreal. And we have a per-D session, which is titled Frontiers of Research, Discovery, and Societal Impact in the Hydrologic Sciences. And we're really going to be looking at how the science is moving, what we need to move it, what are the new technologies, and how do we impact society with the science that we're doing. And we also have a topical session titled Novel Outcomes in the Hydraulic Sciences, Emerging Areas of Research, New Education Approaches, Voting Participation, and Society Impact, all of the things that we talked about today. And we invite you to submit papers to this session. So if you have novel outcomes research and you really want to show it off, and it could be in the scientific aspect, it could be in the educational training, how do we better do societal impacts, they would be great for this session. And I think this is gonna wrap it up. If you have any questions, I know there have been some questions that have been coming up, and we'll be happy to answer them now if we haven't yet.
So thanks, Ingrid. So that's the end of our formal presentation. As Ingrid mentioned, there are several questions in the Q&A, and I believe Julia is going to help us moderate a little bit. I can see there's been some typing going on and in that chat box, and I know Justin has seemed to have volunteered to answer a couple questions live. So
yeah,
let's get started.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending and for putting in your questions in the questions and answer box. Definitely check it out. A lot of them have already been answered, but we're gonna discuss some of the open questions and maybe circle back to some of the answered ones as well to add more context. Please feel free to add more questions to the Q&A as we go. The more the merrier. The first question, Justin, I think you volunteered to answer live. Does HS entertain eager proposals?
Yeah, I guess I did click that answer live button without realizing it, but I'm happy to take a crack at it. I think HS does not typically entertain eager proposals, and Laura or Ingrid may want to chime in, but there are a lot of special initiatives that go on in different years, like Signals in the Soil and some of the NSF big ideas that do invite eager proposals into NSF, and HS often contributes funding towards those.
Yeah, I guess I would add that, so eager proposals, really hydrologic sciences in the past has not entertained eager proposals. We've had ongoing discussions about this. Really, I think that comes down to eager proposals can be funded outside of the ad hoc and panel review process, which means that you have an opportunity to fund things that are high risk, high reward, that might have a hard time getting through that review process. But we just want to make sure that we're not circumventing the review process in any way. So we have not, in the time that our group has been working together, yet seen an eager proposal that we feel rises to the level of something that we would move forward with. But I would say we never say never, and we want to make sure that we leave all options open for funding the highest quality scholarship out there. And it's just that the bar for funding an eager is high because we do really believe in the review process. And so it would have to be something exceptional, I think, for us to go outside of that.
Awesome. We had two different questions kind of involving the hypothesis a priori approach to developing research questions. Specifically, Praveen Kumar asks, if we use machine learning / data-driven techniques, is it often not possible to identify testable hypothesis a priori? Often these are outcomes of the approach. How might that fit into the three-legged stool model?
I can start with an answer, and then I would encourage Ingrid or Justin to add on with anything I've missed. I mean, I think this is a good question, and my experience with the review process is that sometimes reviews will comment, of course, that the PI has not presented a testable hypothesis, and this can be a pretty strong criticism. And this might be a challenge in the case where methods are more exploratory and the traditional kind of hypothesis testing framework may not work. But I would say that when ad hoc reviewers and panelists come across proposals that really present a compelling research question, even if it's not stated as a testable hypothesis, or a really compelling research objective, and it's really clear how the proposed work is going to fill a gap in our understanding, then I think that common reviewer comment about testable hypotheses doesn't come up as often. I think the reviews tend to come back to the testable hypothesis comment when people have the feeling that a proposal is just data collection for the sake of data collection, or kind of a fishing expedition, or it just doesn't seem like there's a particular outcome or objective in mind. That's kind of an easy criticism to fall back on. So I have seen proposals successful that lay out real clear objectives. I think if it's highly exploratory, I mean, or depending on the focus on machine learning and data-driven techniques, there are those other programs that Ingrid mentioned, and these programs are coming up at the National Science Foundation because there's a lot of interest in machine learning and data-driven techniques, and perhaps those proposals have a challenge of fitting in with a disciplinary program for some of the reasons that are coming across in the questions. So I would say one great thing is we have these programs like EarthCube, geoinformatics, that are really primed for data-driven, data science type proposals. And so, you know, I would just say, looking at those solicitations, you could, and we could help you try to answer this question, whether your research proposal is going to be more successful if reviewed in like the geoinformatics program, or whether it's going to be more successful reviewed in the hydrologic sciences program. And those programs talk to each other too. So for example, if there's a proposal that comes into geoinformatics that has a real hydrologic sciences component, those program officers will typically reach out to us and say, hey, we have this geoinformatics proposal. It looks like it's really tightly coupled to your discipline. And we will do things like help them find reviewers. We might even consider co-funding it. So sometimes proposals can be funded by both hydrologic sciences and geoinformatics. So sometimes it's really finding the best fit, knowing that you can still cross boundaries and be co-reviewed by multiple programs. So yeah, so there's a lot of communication between those programs, and my advice would be, one, if you have research that the community is going to be excited about, that is like the most important core kernel, and making sure that that proposal gets in front of the right audience that will really understand its importance and be able to give the most kind of on-point critical feedback. And that's kind of the program officer's job, right, is to try to make sure that the right audience sees the proposal and it's in the program that is the best fit.
Awesome.
So I would add, or first of all, I totally agree with what Laura had just said. I would add that though what we're talking about, the programs and what we have laid out seems very rigid, it's not. There's quite a bit of flexibility. So yes, we want to make sure that you know the direction that or the reviewers want to make sure that you know the direction that you're taking your research to. You can't just have an open-ended question that you don't even have an idea what, where it's going to go. But there are very, very, very specific hypotheses, and there are broader hypotheses, and you just have to be very convincing on that. Where is it that you're taking your research toward, and that it fits the hydrologic sciences. And like what Laura said, there are other programs that may fit better. So in terms of data fusion and hydroinformatics, if your question it's about how to do the data fusion, that's not going to be a good question for hydrologic sciences. If using data fusion, it's going to answer some of the questions related to hydrologic processes by using this data fusion or AI or hydroinformatics, then that would be proper. So if you need to lay it out in a way that it is convincing, like Laura said. And if you have any questions, though we can't answer for what the reviewers may think or may write in the review, but we could point you out toward how to best submit your proposal in that regard.
Yeah, thank you for all the answers to that. We had one more comment come up regarding this question as we were speaking about, is it still possible to hypothesize the usefulness of a certain data to generate desirable predictions? So would hypothesizing regarding the data that as an outcome be more relevant to hydrologic science or one of the other programs that you mentioned?
I'm not, so I hope I understand the question correctly. And I'm scrolling quickly through the window here to see. But it sounded like the hypothesis would be whether the data are useful for or could answer specific questions. And I guess I'll fall back to, I think Ingrid said something really on point just a moment ago, which is, and this question comes up a lot when things are kind of at the interface between two programs, especially when there are things that are at the interface of like a new technology in a discipline or a new methodology in a discipline. And so this data fusion kind of falls in there. If the question is really about the data fusion technique, or sometimes like we sometimes share proposals with mathematics, right? If someone is trying to advance mathematical approach or something, and they just happen to be applying it to a hydrologic sciences question, you know, then it might fall more within math, and we might co-review it, and we might even co-fund it. Whereas if someone is taking known mathematical methods and applying them to really novel hydrologic sciences questions, that might fall within hydrologic sciences, and math would say, well, you know, that's not really at the cutting edge of our discipline, but it's important, and they might even consider co-reviewing or co-funding. So I think that data fusion kind of falls into the similar area where if you're really at the cutting edge of data fusion as like a approach or methodology or discipline, then I think going to a program like geoinformatics or EarthCube, you know, you're going to get reviewed by an audience that really understands that the data fusion technique or the data processing technique, or the, you know, whatever you want to call data science approach you're taking is really at the cutting edge. That's like the right area. If you're using kind of known techniques, but you're applying them to novel hydrologic sciences question, that comes up for hydrologic sciences. I see this a lot, actually, this push and pull between two disciplines that we're kind of getting at with the data side happens with other areas too. So like geophysics, I think this sometimes comes up. You know, if someone's doing hydrogeophysics, you know, is it a geophysics proposal or is it a hydrologic sciences proposal? And it really depends, you know, if someone is using known geophysical techniques in a new way that allows them to answer questions in the hydrologic sciences that couldn't be answered before, that's a hydrologic sciences proposal. Whereas if they're really investigating a geophysical technique that no one's used before, is really at the cutting edge, then I think geophysics is more interested because it's more like at the forefront of their discipline. So these questions are really good questions because I think they come up all the time. And it's at these interfaces between programs. And honestly, I think my view is from the outside, it can be very hard to figure out the home for a proposal. And so I just would encourage you to reach out with, you know, if you have a one-page description of what you're thinking you want to propose, we can help you figure out the answer to these questions in the context of your particular project. And I don't think I appreciated this before joining NSF, how often PIs do approach program officers with those questions and how much program officers are willing and able to help you figure that out and really have your best interests in mind and wanting to fund the best work. So I would encourage folks to follow up with their specific research idea and talking with the program officers in these relevant programs to figure out the best home.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and I'll just say that not every project that we fund is going to take the form of a perfect three-legged stool. Depending on the idea, it could be structured differently and still be successful.
And I would add on this latest question on whether the hypothesis is that a better data set, that a data set it's better than another data set. I think you really need to pose the question on how is the answer to that question going to advance understanding and knowledge in hydrologic sciences? So would selecting, what is the answer you're getting? A better data set? So how does that advance the hydrologic sciences, right? And try to pose the questions in different ways so that you understand that ultimately what it's being answered, it is important for the community and to the knowledge that we gain. So I don't know that there's just one answer, right or wrong. I just think that you really need to think about, is the answer going to advance the knowledge and understanding in hydrologic sciences and processes?
Awesome. Thank you for all of the context for all of those questions. We had two questions kind of related to budget. One from Hillary McMillan, who asks, it seems tough to ask non-academic partners with assistance, letters of support or advice, and commitment to broader impact section when only a small percentage of proposals are funded. They might be working with a small budget and not have a lot of time for tasks and a small chance of funding. Is there any advice on this? And specifically, if they're promising to commit resources, but they can't do that and put that in their budget in time, if they don't know whether or not the project is going to go ahead, is there any advice on essentially working with non-academic partners for broader impacts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid point. Getting an NSF proposal funded is not for the faint of heart. It does take a lot of effort. I think a lot of people have a misperception about the success rates, and they think they're actually a lot lower than they actually are. We typically fund anywhere between a fifth and a third of the proposals we receive, which may be a surprise to some of these people who may have heard rumors otherwise. We do encourage people to put plenty of money in their budget to support the broader impact activities that are being proposed. So whoever the non-academic collaborator you're working with, I would encourage you to have a candid conversation with them, asking how much money do they really need to do the work that's being proposed, and how much would they need to be willing to justify on their end to put in the time that it would take to get it to the level that it would be fundable.
I would add that the conversations need to happen with the organizations or the people that you have identified as being of benefit. I have formed many collaborations with organizations that there's no funding for them, but they are gaining in knowledge, they're gaining in human resources, they're gaining in advancing their own vision and mission. So we work with MDs that they want to advance public health, and they want to know what is the impact of water and contamination on that, and their own knowledge, they really want to advance it. So how we pose our questions and our excitement in the research that we're doing when we're talking to these organizations or industry, or so first of all, the conversation have to happen. And what I always say, once I identify somebody or organization, is that the worst that it could happen, and they say that they're not interested. That's the worst that it could happen. But if you don't have that conversation and you identify what are those win-win situations, then you would not get that collaboration. So it's and you'd be amazed. I have been amazed of agencies that I have approached, and they're like, yeah, we're really interested. And sometimes there are organizations that even say, hey, we're willing to put this, and we haven't even asked. So the conversation has to happen. And if it's not, it doesn't happen now. I mean, if what you're looking for may not be right at this moment, it may be right at a later moment. So I wouldn't be discouraged. I think at least that has been my experience.
Thank you. The second budget program or question was from Tao Wen, what is the proper way to budget the part of the work related to data management? For example, how much funding is typically allocated or allowed to be requested for data management? And how do reviewers look at this?
I can try to answer that question and then, of course, ask my colleagues to add on to my answer. So as Ingrid talked about during the presentation, we take data management very seriously, and we really want to see the hydrologic science community embrace making their data publicly available, findable, accessible to a broad audience. And so with that in mind, we have this mandate, and we don't want to give our community an unfunded mandate. We want to make sure you have the resources to do it. We do have investment in resources that we hope folks will take advantage of because we are making that investment. So, you know, this event is being hosted by COASI. We support COASI, the Hydrologic Sciences Program, and COASI provides data services. And so if you, you know, are new to this and wanting to, you know, comply or make your data publicly available, findable, we have tried to create an easy solution, or I'm sorry, we have tried to support an organization that has created a relatively simple solution so that you can do that at a low or no cost. If you have a unique data management scenario, and I'd have to talk with folks one-on-one to figure out what that is, that really justified committing a portion of the budget to data management, we'd certainly be open to that. I mean, broadly, when I think about budgets for proposals, I worry about two things. You know, I worry that PIs would inflate a budget for fear that program officers would come back and say, you need to cut your budget, you know, and be in a defensive position. We don't do that by default. And so we don't want people to build out budgets with that in mind. I also have concerns that PIs, especially early career PIs, might underfund themselves and really not budget what they need to complete the work that they've proposed. We really want to set you up for success. So, you know, if your project has a data management component that requires some amount of resources in your budget, I would encourage you to include those in your budget, knowing that they're going to have to be justified. And you can justify them both in the budget justification itself, or if there's something exceptional, I mean, if there's significant resources in there, it may be that in the proposal you have to explain why the existing data management support that's available in the community doesn't meet your needs, and you have this additional component that you need to fund because there's no other way to do it. So, you know, I kind of view it from both sides. We are investing a lot in data management for our community, and we want to see the community take advantage of those things that we're supporting so that we can be efficient, but we also want to set you up for success. And so, you know, if you can justify the scope of work and budget and how that all works together, and it's really powerful and important, then that makes it easier for us to get behind it.
Awesome. Keeping on the data management theme, Christopher asked earlier about does data need to be deposited within 2 years of collection or within 2 years of the end of the collection? Specifically, if I collect a 2-year time series, what do I need? When do I need to post it? And Justin, you answered this a little bit. Maybe you can kind of speak to it a little bit more. But we had a follow-up question regarding model results and output, and if there's any guidance on how much data should be preserved when using model runs. So maybe Justin, you can elaborate on this a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think this scenario is kind of spelled out if you go to the Earth Science Division webpage and click on the latest data policy. So if it's a data set that you're collecting for 2 years, you would need to publish it within 2 years of the end of the data collection. If you have a longer term data collection effort that goes on beyond like 36 months, you might be required to publish the data in closer to real time, and that would be sort of decided on a case-by-case basis.
And a follow-up for model runs and model results and output. Are there any guidelines as to how much data should be preserved if your results that you're reporting on are models rather than data points themselves?
Laura or Ingrid, do you want to chime in on that?
Sure, I'll jump in. When you are having model outcomes, you want to make sure first that the data that you're using, it's available, either because you make it available or because you're using data that it's available. And the reason for that is that you want to make sure that another researcher who wants to verify or make the same runs or add to those runs that could use the same data and have perhaps similar results. If it's a different model, it may not be the same results, right? But you want to make sure that there is reproducibility in what you're doing. If you are and the model outputs that you're going to deposit in should go along with that. When we do modeling, we know that we do a lot of runs depending on what kind of modeling we do. If it's statistical or not, but there are a lot of runs that don't allow us to get anywhere, right? We're not proving, we learned that these are not working, these are not good. Well, perhaps you want to be selective in those outputs because it could be huge outputs, right? I mean, this could be hard to manage in terms of the amount of data that you could be creating. So you want to make sure that you have the outputs that are, that eventually could be tested, could be used by other researchers in the work that they are doing, and it's and they're good outputs. There's no point on having I'm not sure how to say this in a better way, of garbage outputs out there, right? They should be good outputs that you believe these are the real outcomes of your research, and they could be tested, they could be reproduced, and or they could be used for further research. So both the data that you use is important to be described or uploaded, as well as the outcomes so that they could be tested or used. And I don't know if Laura, you want to add something else on that.
I mean, I think you both really answered this question well. It's a complicated question. I mean, I think this is admittedly a kind of emerging area in some ways, like how to manage data sets when they become quite large, and like model output. I mean, how do you really make this information broadly available, and to what audience, and who might use it? But I think the underlying motivation of reproducibility is a good one. And so what kind of information would the community need to ensure that the outcomes of your research one could reproduce? And so if that's, input files that drive a known, model, that one could rerun and regenerate your results, but I know things get a lot more complicated than that. So I think this is admittedly kind of an emerging area of how we handle exceptionally large data sets or model output, and kind of going back to the underlying motivation of reproducibility might be the best way to think about it.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great question, and I've heard a nearly identical version of this question asked in quite a few recent meetings at national academies, and I don't think there's a clear consensus. It kind of comes down to the specific model and the output and the panel's guidance on how much of it should be preserved.
Thank you. So we have a question from someone who I think is similarly deadline motivated, like Laura mentioned she is, and I know I am. Dorina asks, is there an ideal time to submit a proposal given that a proposal will/may go to a panel? When do panels meet? I realized there was a discussion about the anytime submission, but having a general idea of when panels meet may help set a deadline to submit the proposal.
I'm happy to answer this question. And, you know, my instinct is to say it's always a good time to submit a proposal with the hopes of motivating you all to submit your best work to the National Science Foundation so that we can support you. But I also know you want to submit at a time where you're going to get efficient review and feedback. And when we had deadlines, that was easier. You know, you submit it, you could kind of guess when the panel would convene perhaps, and anticipate when you might have an outcome. And Ingrid mentioned that we right now still have 2 panels a year. And we don't divulge when those panels occur exactly to maintain the confidentiality of the process for our panelists and whatnot. But generally we have a spring panel and a fall panel. And so the timing there is, of course, when you submit a proposal, and I feel experienced PIs often know this and they're at an advantage, and I want to help make our early career PIs have the same advantage, and in just kind of understanding the flow. When you submit the proposal, of course, you have to check that it's compliant, we have to make sure it's appropriate for our program, we have to secure ad hoc reviews, and we have to do all of that before we can bring the proposal to a panel. And so it might be 6 weeks before a panel convenes that we have to say, okay, you know, if a proposal comes in between now and the panel, we won't be able to secure the reviews and get it to panel in time. And so that is a limiting factor. So we can't tell you exactly when the panels are convened, but you can know that there is a spring and fall panel. So submitting in the middle of the spring or the middle of the fall, you risk being right before or right after, you know, a panel. Some programs, we have done this at times, you know, if you submit a proposal and we know we won't be able to bring it to a panel for many months, we may let you know that so that you can just leave the proposal pending, and it's fine. It's fine. Or we might want to give you the opportunity to, you know, pull it back if you want to continue to work on it, or you know, adjust your submission, make that decision independently. So you can always, sometimes PIs will reach out and say, hey, you know, if I submit now, what's going to happen? And we can't be precise, but we can try to give you our best feedback without, you know, divulging the exact dates or somehow making that process no longer confidential.
Yeah, the advice I usually give is to pick a start date for your project that's 9 to 12 months out from the date of submission. And usually we're able to accommodate that. Some people will pick a start date 3 months after they submit, and in very rare cases that's possible, but more often than not, we're not able to move things through that fast.
Okay, we have one other deadline question. Do we know if the career deadline will be extended this year?
I don't know that yet.
I don't think we have an answer to that question yet. There's a lot of uncertainty. I will say, if you're wondering about anything NSF's response to COVID-19 and everything that's happening, I should have put the link, and I don't have the link memorized, but if you Google, you know, COVID-19 NSF, there's a lot of information posted on the NSF website, both in terms of, there's like a frequently asked questions sheet. And so as information becomes available, so for example, if there's an adjustment to the career deadline, which we have not heard, that would be the place to find it. And so you can always go back there to look for updated responses from NSF.
And I would say if you're in a position where you really want to occur and that you're feeling the pressure to get in the deadline, because of COVID. Send us an email and let us know, and we'll float your comment up the chain so that the people who decide on the career deadline will have information to inform them.
Thank you. A lot of our remaining questions are kind of one-off questions like, can more than one proposal with the same PI be submitted to this program simultaneously?
I can answer this, but I want to give a chance if Ingrid or Justin want to jump in.
You can take it, Laura.
Thanks, Justin. Can more than one proposal with the same PI be submitted simultaneously? I mean, by the rules, yes. Yes. I would say one challenge there is, you are competing with yourself in the same panel. And so I guess we could argue about whether that improves or hurts your chances for funding. I don't want to guess about that, but you are competing with yourself in the same panel. That's what I should say. If you submit two proposals and at a very similar time and they go to the same panel, then they're being reviewed simultaneously. And I'm not sure that puts a PI at a particular advantage. So I would say you can, but yeah, you can. But I might think carefully about, how the panel is going to assess like whether you have the capacity, to lead both of those projects at the same time, and how your time might be allocated across those different projects. That might factor into the review. That's all.
I would add that, if the proposals are very similar, so yes, you can. But if the proposals are very similar, you have to be very careful because they may not even be reviewed, right? If they're very, very similar. If they're very different, then the capacity question may be brought up. And if they are in a serial of proposals, that is, if you're gonna generate data from or information from one proposal that may feed the other proposal, that is your downstream proposal. It's not gonna fit well because no one knows whether the upstream proposal is going to be funded, right? So they're not gonna, generally speaking, what I have seen is that if it depends on something else that it's not funded and you don't know whether it's going to be successful, it's not going to be viewed that well. But I agree with what Laura was saying in terms of that you're competing with yourself, and you should also look at the ability, the capacity that you have to do all the research.
Yeah, and there's also some situations where you might submit a proposal to HS and another program like geomorphology, and the program officers do talk to each other. And if you submit two big proposals simultaneously to two different programs, it might be that only one program funds you if we don't think that you would be able to manage both projects at the same time. So it's not just within HS, but we do talk with other programs across NSF.
The only thing I would add for that question is it does seem, so it's uncommon to have an individual be PI and multiple grants in the same panel, but it's not totally uncommon for individuals to be a PI on one award and perhaps a co-PI on a separate award. So that's a different scenario, and I think that would be more, would be less unusual.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. We have two more data management plan questions, and I think these are going to have to be our last ones to be respectful of everyone's time and to wrap up before 5. So the first one is, when source code developed as part of a proposal, is that part of our data management plan?
So it sounds like the question is source code that's developed as part of the proposal. So if we can really holding the community to making data and code and model results available for NSF funded work. So if something is done outside of NSF funding, then we don't really have purview to say what you need to do with that. But I would just encourage you as good practice to make that material publicly available just as a member of the hydrologic sciences community. But our data management plans would be for the work that is done as part of the scope of the award that we're providing funding for.
Yeah, I guess if the question is on how to treat a code that it's been, I was trying to look for it in the question and answers, but how to treat a code that it's being developed within the proposal or outside of the proposal?
I think the question was within the proposal.
Yeah, so one, there's three things I would say about that. One, if it's, first of all, you want to have a research question that it's going to advance knowledge and understanding in hydrologic sciences. And I know I'm repeating this, but this is the most important thing that you have to think about. So I would tend to think that a code development would be done to answer that question, because otherwise it would not be a hydrologic science question, right? It would be a code development question, and then that should go to another program. So if it's a code that it's being developed to answer a hydrologic sciences, that would be a method. And so I would tend to think that this is something that goes into the approach. But if you develop a code, most likely you're going to want to publish it. And if it's part of the data management, and if it's in your, so we ask codes to be put into the data management. Like if you develop a code, then you should probably put it in GitHub or a similar depository. So if it's within the proposal, then it should be within the approaches. And I would tend to think that it should be included in the data management because it's developed within the proposal.
Okay, thank you. Another question that's gotten a number of likes is, could you explain the progression from quote unquote dear colleague letter to solicitation, for example, timing, where the PIs are to provide input, etc. Is this in the PAPPG? This is from Kevin Roche.
I don't know if Justin wants to, our most seasoned program officer, talk about this. I'm happy to, but what do you think, Justin?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have a great answer. I think in general, sort of dear colleague letters are used to encourage proposals on a specific topic in a fairly quick time frame that's just appeared of interest, whereas a new solicitation takes a longer time to work its way through the system. The solicitations are usually informed by broad community discussions, and we look at white papers that come from conferences as well as National Academy of Sciences reports. So that's typically where the PIs should provide their input, I think, is in these conferences and when the National Academies ask for their input. We take those reports and conference proceedings very seriously in developing the solicitations.
I was gonna, so thank you, Justin, because that's really helpful. I was wondering if there was a known answer to that, and
yeah.
Let me figure out, maybe it's not always clear, but there's also dear colleague letters, of course, that don't lead to a solicitation, and I don't think have any intention of leading to a solicitation. So sometimes, you know, the way I've been thinking about dear colleague letters, even around the HS program, is you know, we have our existing program and our existing budget, but if we wanted to motivate the community to respond by maybe submitting proposals that address a particular topic or address a particular problem or need in within our discipline, we could write a Dear Colleague letter, and it means, you know, we have the same budget and the same resources to work with, but we're essentially like just throwing up a flare to the community, like, hey, you know, if you could respond to this letter, you know, we are looking for you to respond in a certain way, and we're going to do that within the scope of an existing program.
So I wanted to add to that we are we're very community-driven program. So proposals, we don't tell people what to write their proposals on, except that they have to be within the hydrologic sciences, right? But it's not like some of other agencies that they're very application driven, and this is what we want you to do, and that's what you have to propose. In this case, we want the ideas to come from the researchers. And many times, if you have an idea, then you should submit a proposal. And so you don't have to wait for DCL to submit a proposal. But in any way, if you have comments, ideas, and you want to talk to program directors, I think you should reach out and talk to the program directors in the different programs. And it doesn't have to be just and ask. And if we have answers, we'll give them, and otherwise we will try to find those that have the answers. So I just wanted to add that. And I just lastly wanted to add, and I know Laura is probably going to take it after this, but, or should, that there are several questions asked, and in particular ideas, you know, does this fit or not? Please reach out to us, and we will be happy to talk to you. So if we won't be able to get to those questions today, just contact us, and we'll be happy to answer those questions.
So it's coming up on 5 o'clock, and Julia, I'll follow your guidance on whether we should end the questions at this point.
Yes, thank you. So I think that was a good place to wrap it up. We're respect everyone's time. Let's wrap this up now. But again, any remaining questions feel free to reach out to our panelists or myself. My email was shared at the beginning of the webinar, but it's jmasterman@quasi.org. I will be happy to send anything along as well. And if you have any questions about Quasi Data Services, I can help with that as well. Thank you again to all of our panelists for putting on this webinar, Laura Lautz, Ingrid Padilla, and Justin Lawrence at NSF, and for all of you for participating and asking all of the questions. I hope that this was as helpful for all of you as possible. I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. And I hope that you will participate in future Quasi webinars.
So let me just add, Julia, I want to thank Julia Masterman at Quasi for hosting the event today. She's been really helpful, and I really appreciate it. And I just want to say, for those that are still on the call, one of the main goals of hosting this town hall is we want to make sure the community really understands what our program is about, and also really open up the opportunity for you to continue to engage with us as program officers. So as has been said, if you have any questions, you have a question today that wasn't answered, you have questions that come up in the future about a proposal you're working on or anything else, I really hope you won't hesitate to reach out to any of us with your questions. And thank you so much for joining us to learn about the Hydrologic Sciences Program at NSF.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.